Australia is a nation, a continent, and the world's biggest island. Despite being the size of a major power, it only packs a middle-sized punch. Although the country is similar in size to the contiguous United States, it contains less than 1/10 of its population. Only a small fraction of its territory is habitable, and this is mainly concentrated around the coastal areas. From Adelaide to Brisbane, a crescent-shaped area is home to Australia's most populous urban centres. Sprinkled on its west and north, Perth and Darwin complete the habitable circle. As an island, Australia doesn't share a land border with any other country, and its only maritime borders are with the smaller island nations of Timor-Leste, the outer islands of Indonesia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and the French territory of New Caledonia. The country is bordered by 3 oceans: the Pacific in the east, the Indian in the west, and the Southern Ocean to the south, including its territorial claims over 20% of Antarctica, by far the largest on the continent. Australia's strategic environment can be broadly divided into 2 main regions. First, the Nearer region, which comprises Australia's coastal areas and its offshore territories, and its adjacent neighbors, including Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, other close Pacific Island states, such as Nauru, and Maritime, Southeast Asia. Australia considers this region as its backyard, where it directly exercises its political, economical, and security influence. In this Nearer region, Australia has also created a network of defense capabilities, deepening its ties with neighboring countries. Here, it conducts specialist training, personnel exchange, regular naval exercises, aerial surveillance, and donation of search and rescue vessels. The second main area of interest is the wider Indo-Pacific region. Expanding from India's southern tip all the way across Hawaii, at the center of this region sits Australia, along with Southeast Asia. This region contains Australia's main economic and political interests, as it is home to the majority of its economic and security partners. Australia's economic growth is based on international trade and the export of goods, particularly natural resources. Around 60% of its total exports consist of mineral and ore products, whereas 15% of its imports is destined to gas and oil products. All of this trade happens via the sea. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority estimates about 99% of trade to and from Australia is seaborne. Thus, Australian shipping lanes are essential to its economic vitality. However, these lanes are vulnerable to disruption. The first weakness is that part of these routes pass through major choke points. For instance, the majority of oil imported to Australia is refined in Singapore, which acts as a conduit between oil extracted in the Persian Gulf and importers of refined petroleum in the rest of Asia. This means that Australian petroleum must pass through 3 major strategic choke points to reach the country: the Strait of Hormuz at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Malacca between the Malay Peninsula and Indonesia, and then through the Strait of Sunda in Indonesia before it can reach Australian territory. Australia's strategic environment is quite unbalanced between its reliance on seaborne trade for its economic growth and its incapability to protect it. Australia's size doesn't match its population. Its 25 million citizens are just not able to support a navy capable of protecting its economic interests in the Pacific. That's why, for Canberra, it is essential to be part of a strong security partnership. Up until the fall of Singapore in 1942 by the Japanese, the UK provided maritime security in exchange for Aussie participation in the British Empire's conflicts. The Boer War, Gallipoli, and the French trenches in the First and Second World Wars all saw the sacrifice of Australian troops in foreign campaigns. These are the tolls that the Australians bared for the protection of their commerce. After 1942, the rising power in Asia and the Pacific became the U.S. Washington and Canberra's World War II relationship was based on America's need for an unsinkable forward operating base in the Pacific theater, and Australia provided just that. However, the terms of this partnership didn't change much from that with the British. Even now, whilst Washington protects Australia's commerce lanes, Australia fights side by side through the AUKUS Treaty, a defense pact similar to NATO and has been in place since 1951. Whenever NATO soldiers visited Australian bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were welcomed by tea, whiskey, and Vegemite. But now, a question comes to mind. If World War II-era Australia worried about Japanese expansion in the Pacific, which country is now perceived as menacing its security? Well, the answer is the People's Republic of China. For Aussie strategists, the East Asian country is seen as the emerging hegemonic power in the Pacific region, challenging the status quo established after World War II. Chinese military buildup across all of its services, but especially of its blue water amphibious C-2 and missile capabilities, creates the perception of assertive Chinese posturing, in particular to other medium regional powers like Australia and Japan. Beijing's aggressive demeanor in hot issues like the East and South China Seas territorial claims, coercive trade practices, the meddling with internal politics, and even the use of cyber attacks portrays Beijing as defying the regional established order. That same order, based on America-led values of democracy, free trade, and market economy. These values are considered in Canberra, but also in Tokyo, New Delhi, and the majority of ASEAN's member capitals as pivotal to their economic growth and the foundations of their statehood. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific policy paved the way to the creation of value-led diplomacy, counterpoised to the PRC's authoritarian model. This set the foundation for a wider strategic partnership where Australia was able to take part in a regional power security forum overseen by the US. Chinese growing military is seen as capable of exerting more and more coercive influence in the region. Chinese blue water navy buildup, in particular of its submarines and amphibious fleets, are seen as an ominous sign to the security of US regional partners' sea lines of communication. As history teaches, during World War II, the Pacific and the Atlantic were the hunting ground for German and Japanese submarines. The disruption of logistics and supply lines from the US was a fundamental strategy for crippling the Pacific War and the Western Front Allies' efforts. If China were to reach such capabilities, it would spell disaster for Australia's seaborne supply lines. Apart from conventional military buildup, there was also a scale-up in gray zone activities related to China. Gray zone activities are described as activities designed to coerce countries in a way that seek to avoid military conflict. These actions include the use of paramilitary forces, militarization of disputed features and territories, and the use of political and economic influence for coercive means. However rocky China and Australia's relationship might be, the two countries have a deep, interrelated economic and cultural exchange. Canberra's biggest trading partner is China, accounting for almost 40% of its export and 25% of its imports in 2019. In less than 20 years, Chinese trade with Australia experienced a growth of 1,860%. Chinese students have over the years flooded Aussie universities, and the exchanges between the two nations are continuously rising. As we have seen, in response to a stronger China, Australia needs a strong U.S. alliance to balance out its strategic needs. The Trilateral Security Pact between Australia, the UK, and the US is the product of this. As the probability of a conflict between China and the USA shifted from far-fetched to unlikely, and from unlikely to less remote, so did Australia's need for renewed strategic commitment. While much of the focus has been around Australia's reneging on a deal with France, it is not really about which submarine to buy, whether about tying U.S. engagement to the protection of the Pacific established order. Again, World War II can give us a few enlightenments here. The UK wouldn't have lasted long without U.S. supply lines and their commitment to the war against Nazi Germany. In the same way, Australia too would have crumbled under the Japanese threat, if not for the U.S.'s war in the Pacific. What Australia needs is an unfaltering support in an unlikely but less remote conflict. If a war were to happen, the delivery of warships and submarines, and of their spares, would be considered an act of war. Whereas France has territories and some minor naval engagements in the Pacific, it is not interested nor capable of assisting Australia in any major fight in the region. When a conflict is still far-fetched, weapons acquisition can be considered for its commercial value and less for its strategic consequences. However, when the tensions start to heighten, it is essential to find a partner who shares the same strategic interests and values. Buying nuclear submarines hints at Australia's strategic shift, from the protection of only its littoral waters to a wider oceanic expanse. As nuclear-powered vessels boast higher cruising speeds and much longer operational range compared to their diesel counterparts, which have been the basis of Australia's naval capability so far. However, the reported 8 submarines are likely to cover but a fraction of Australia's area of interest. This is because a good rule of thumb for these types of vessels is that for each operative military vessel, there's one in standby and one under maintenance work. So that reduces the total number of ships on a mission at any time to 1/3 of its full capacity. All in all, Australia's choice of acquiring fewer but more capable American submarines has more strategic connotations than anything. Australia needs UK and US support in the Pacific, and she knows that the commonality of strategic interest will keep them close, even in a conflict. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe and leave a like or a dislike and a comment. Also, thanks to all of you who left feedback in the previous videos. These are highly appreciated.